Everything I've ever done was always oriented toward writing and toward words because that's what I'm good at.
Welcome to the Gopherwood Lounge. I am Arc Press Senior Editor DJ Butler. Come on in out of the rain. Before we get started, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, go to arc.press and sign up for our mailing list. Come over to X and follow us at arc_press. Do all the things. Got a very special guest today. Excited to talk to Arc Press Editor-in-Chief, Tony Daniel. We've had him on before, but today's a special conversation because I want to talk to Tony about Tony. So, Tony, welcome to the channel.
Thank you. Look forward to spilling my guts.
Well, there's one thing that all human beings are truly experts in, is right. It's
Yes, you're right. Yeah. Although I've
themselves.
tried to blank some of it out, yeah, and succeeded.
So, as the hard living in the grunge scene in Seattle.
Yeah, yeah. What
Well,
was yeah.
So what I'd love our viewers to get at today is just a sense of who you are that might help them understand where ARC is coming from and how to think about ARC, because obviously you're arguably the great influence on ARC Press, philosophically, editorially.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I'm the guy that can say no and to no matter what the enthusiasm might be for something. That's one thing. Uh, Maybe that's all.
That's funny. That is funny. You're underselling yourself, but that's a great joke. Um, I think one of the big themes we're going to see here is that you didn't come out of school saying, now I'm going to be an editor of science fiction. Like, A, it's not necessarily obvious you were headed for science fiction, and B, it's not necessarily obvious you were headed for being an editor. So, I'd love to hear about how you thought about literature when you were young. What was exciting to you? At what point did you think I'm going to get into literature, and how did you see that happening? What did you
Yeah.
think you were going to do?
Well, I mean, if we want to go back to high school, um, that's that's something we could do. I mean, I was like just a voracious reader in high school, and a lot of people will think back on books that they read, and they will realize that, oh, I read that later. Well, I look back on books I read, and I think, when the heck did I read that? I know I read it, and it turns out I read it when I was like 16 or 17 or 15 or whatever. And I don't know how that happened. All I remember is a blur of always walking around with a book. Um, Read a great deal of science fiction and fantasy at that time. And this was the early 80s, etc. Um, eh, but I was not exclusive to science fiction and fantasy even then by any means. I read huge quantities of mystery and literature and everything else. So going to college, I was absolutely convinced I was going to medical school, and so went in with a scholarship. I was This was in Alabama. I won this essay contest for the state with college best literature essay or something, the NCTE award or whatever. So I went in with like all the expectations you would for a liberal arts major, but I was going to do medicine. And so I did about 2 years of that. And I suddenly just realized, whatever my heart might see, all of my strengths lay in language and writing, and everything that I was making really good grades in was related to that. So, slowly I just gave up on that and, well, I'm going to be a writer. So that was an epiphany moment sometime in my sophomore year that really was the change. And then I had to figure out how to do that. I thought, well, I must have to go to graduate school because I don't have any idea how to just suddenly, because I was scared to death. I didn't know how to make any money at this. So I went to grad school and in in philosophy. That was my major. So and I loved college, and I absolutely I despised graduate school. I hated the professors with their trying to force you into their little lanes. I hated the kind of things you had to write with all the critical theory and everything back. This was the heyday of deconstructionism and things like that. Um, and so, as a respite from constantly getting pounded by professors telling me that that I wasn't up to snuff, it's like I don't know, man. I feel like I'm up to snuff. Um, So, and I started reading science fiction magazines. I retreated to my youth and just started every 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 moment of my spare moments I spent reading Asimov's science fiction magazine and FNSF and going on long drives and considering what the heck I was doing in St. Louis, uh, wasting my time with these goobers. And
So were you at George Washington? Is that what's in St. Louis? Or
Wash U,
oh,
Washington
Wash U. Yeah, yeah,
University.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So by the way, it's interesting maybe to sort of throw this out for readers who may not realize this, but like magazines were once a huge venue for publishing, even not necessarily short fiction. You could serially publish a novel, but a
Mhm.
lot of short fiction. There was kind of a heyday, and you're probably about in the end of it at that
I
point.
was at the very, very tip end of it. Yeah. But it was even in the 90s, and this was not the 90s yet, almost. Um, it was it was a stepping stone
Yeah,
to getting a book published, and you could make money. Uh, and back when Omni and Playboy existed as fiction markets, you could make a living off of writing short fiction still. Some of my mentors did that, like Lucius Shepard. The Playboy published serious science fiction stories. William Gibson and was in Omni. That's where he made his start. And my sort of mentor figure, Lucius, he was all over Omni and Playboy fiction sections. There were editors that really bought good stuff there.
yeah.
So, and you can make living dough off of that. And so it hadn't occurred to us by the time I started, which, in the beginning of the 90s, that this was not a thing anymore. Omni disappeared and Playboy stopped being a fiction market,
Yeah.
effectively. And so you didn't have that. And the magazine subscriptions just, they started cratering and but still, until the internet hit and really hit big, being in Asimov's was a big deal, and it got you considered for publication by people, including me. So and I spent most of the '90s publishing science fiction stories in Asimov's and a few in SNFS and Amazing and in anthologies all over the place. So, like, probably nearly 100 of these
And
things.
were you doing this while you were at Wash U? Were you starting to submit?
Uh, I had started sending stuff out in college at that point. And at WashU, I was having this crisis of being in the fact that I thought it would be like I could get to go to graduate school and read all this great stuff. And it turned out that they wanted to make me into clones of themselves, and I hated them. Um, and they were just like miserable human beings. All of the professors were just miserable human beings. And so I could not see that ever for myself. Anyway, so I went to Clarion West, which is this, it used to be a huge deal and it's not anymore because woke and idiotic. But it used to be this great thing. You spent 6 weeks at a writing workshop, and it was all about science fiction, fantasy, and they had writers in. My year was Orson Scott Card, Connie Willis, Karen Joy Fowler, um, uh, Lucia Shepard.
Zelazny, wasn't Lucius Shepard. Okay.
Zelazny was our final
Yeah.
our final guy, Roger Zelazny, and they have an editor in. And ours was an editor from Bantam, which is Doubleday back then, which is Random House now.
And you really, this is, I mean, Clarion West, isn't it like the University of Seattle dorms or something? Like you go
That's what it
stay
was
there
back
for 6
then.
weeks.
That now, who knows? It's nothing now. I would not recommend anybody go to Clarion West anymore, but
Yeah,
back
but
then it was quite quite the
Yeah.
thing.
Just to give a picture of the experience. I mean, you go there for 6 weeks.
6 weeks, exactly. There are many stories from old Clarions. And there was another thing. Clarion and Claren West were two things, but they're all sort of related. And there's all kind of stories about people, marriages breaking up, and all kinds of crazy things were going on that people were having moments in their life where they were developing as writers at these workshops. And it happened to me. I suddenly got good enough to publish there. Um, and I realized it. Roger Zelazny realized it. He told me, he said, I don't know, at this point, you are as good. You are good enough to publish. And this was the last week. I don't know why they're not buying it. I think they will. He gave me a great blurb going out. Lucius became my mentor over the next few years. Lucius Shepard, great science, multi-award winning science fiction writer.
Yeah.
And my good friend over the next few years. And Lucius recommended me to Gardner Dozois strongly, and Gardner was the editor of Isaac Asimov's science fiction magazine, which I had been reading in extensively up till then anyway. And so I was pretty much poised to be an author who would appeal to Gardner's sensibilities right then. And so I started selling to Gardner. And so I dropped out of graduate school and went to film school instead because I was still too terrified to be a writer on my own. So I did a year of film school, and I was just like, that was at USC in LA. And I finally was just like, man, I gotta do this. Uh, I think that was the order, or maybe I went to Claren West during film school.
Yeah.
I can't remember at the moment. Yeah, I think that was it. So
Yeah.
maybe I tried film school and then I went to Clarion West. And then you get this far away from things and they start to collide into one giant.
The order slips around. Yeah.
Right. Anyway, so I dropped out of film school, moved to Seattle into eventually into a 49 Crown Super Coach bus, um, which I lived in for 5 years on the island of Vashon, Seattle, and started writing. And it started publishing in the magazines. So,
But this is the first I've heard of the bus. I want to get right back to the magazine.
Mhm.
You lived in a bus for 5 years.
Yeah, it was an old city bus that used to be Mercer Island, which is a sort of Seattle suburb now.
Yeah.
But yeah, and they had sold them off. This was a 49 model, and it was used during the 50s, and they had sold them off to various hippies. And the hippies had taken them and made them into little cabins on Vashon.
Oh, interesting.
And so I bought it from a guy. Uh, it, it had been the bus of this artist called Milo Duke, who's still around, who's great. I love his stuff. You know, sort of a boomer. It's hard to. There was a name for their group. It was like guys that went and took mushrooms and then and did illustrations. They had their own movement going on. I loved his work. And
Sort
I
of Ken
still
Kesey kind of stuff.
uh it was after that,
Yeah.
they were younger than that, but
Yeah.
it was an 80s movement. Let's put it
Okay.
that way. I can't remember what it was called. But anyway, I got it from Milo. Um Milo used to do some high-end science fiction illustrations for some of the small presses like Mark Ziesing's press. Milo
Yeah.
did some of the covers for and stuff like that. So anyway, that was the connection. And anyway, so I got Milo's bus. He was this really careful artist dude who loved the aesthetic. So he had fixed it up as a cabin and it had a beautiful little wood stove in it. So it was really great. And it was perfectly livable. uh, Bohemian bus, and it was near a house. It was on the property of a house, and that woman was a lawyer who worked in Seattle, and she became sort of a patron to several of us who lived around and in the house. It was very hippie dippy
Nice.
at the time. So and I really liked living on Vashon, but it there came a time when I didn't want to live there anymore, and I moved away to Prague
Yeah,
actually.
yeah.
So that was when I went abroad finally. So
Okay, okay. So
and that
that's
but my writing got started in that bus.
right. And you were self-consciously you were thinking of yourself as a short story writer at that point?
No, I thought that writing short stories was the way to break into the whole thing of making a living. And by 1993, my first book was was published by Tor.
Hmm.
So my first book, my first two books were Tor books,
Yeah.
and
I did not know
it
that. That
was
that's not Metaplanetary yet. Metaplanetary
no, no.
later.
Warpath and Earthling were my first two books.
Okay.
And that was directly a result of, and Warpath is a fix-up novel of a short story of a novella that I sold to Gardner at Asimov's called Candle.
Mhm.
So, Candle led to Warpath, which led to Earthling, um, which led to me having an existential crisis in trying to figure out what my third book would be, and continuing to write short stories and stuff. And
Yeah.
anyway, and my third book was Metaplanetary, and that was a HarperCollins book. That was my big science fiction novel.
Mhm.
And in between, I had a short story collection come out from Arkham House. Back in the day, Arkham House was a really cool imprint
Yeah.
for up and coming science
Yeah.
fiction writers. So, I mean, if you had a story collection from them, it was really good. Um,
Yeah. Which is I mean, it's interesting, right? If you sort of know the genealogies, the histories of science fiction, Arkham House was founded by August Derleth to
right.
among other things, keep H.P. Lovecraft's stuff in print. H.P. Lovecraft had been this sort of correspondent and mentor to a whole generation of writers.
Hmm.
And so it turns out you're in some sense kind of in that
Oh, absolutely. The guy that
genealogy.
took it over at during the 80s and 90s, Jim, what's it, Turner, Jim Turner. He was interested in not just reprinting old stuff, but in turning it into really a cutting edge of science fiction publisher, and he did. And great people from the 90s had short story collections out of there, like Lucius, like Michael. Oh, what's he was a friend of mine. I can't remember his last name. I will bring it back. A lot of really well thought of literary science fiction writers during the 90s were put out um, by that place. So
Yeah. And you
the
so
name of it changed to Hype. What did he change the name? By the time mine came out, they had changed. He had started something that was the same and changed it over. I can't remember all this. It's all arcane history to me now.
yeah.
In any way, that was all connected. And Jim Turner died tragically from cancer at the end of the 90s. So all of that ended at that point. Um,
Yeah. So your stepping stone strategy though, I
Sort
mean
of worked.
yeah, well it did work, right? It worked. You first of all, in and of itself, you've won uh
I won the Asimov's Reader's Choice Award, which is the best short story of that year award
yeah, for
from
Life on the
Bloomsbury
Moon, right? It
for
must have been
Life
in
on
the
the Moon.
90s.
Yes.
And then a separate award, you were a Hugo finalist separately for a short story, or is that for a
Yeah.
novel?
No, it was for short story. It was for Life on the Moon.
Oh, okay.
My other another almost winner of the and well-regarded story that got me very close to some more recognition, and the thing that sold the most over the years is my short story called A Dry Quiet War.
Mm.
It's been reprinted a whole bunch over the years. Probably
If people,
made more money off of that thing than anything I ever wrote,
that's funny.
which was which was not what, something I thought would happen. So
100%. So if
yeah.
readers wanted to find A Dry Quiet War or Life on the Moon, is there an easy place to grab those?
Yeah, they're both actually free online at the moment, but you can also find them in lots of reprints of things as well. And you could there used to be an early website when the web started up called Infinity Plus, Keith Brooks ran, and I let him have these things to sort of get his fiction and they're still up, so you can find these
Yeah.
that way. Um, but they've also been reprinted in several anthologies. You can find them places,
Yep.
but they're pretty easy to find, and they've been translated as well. There's Czech and Italian versions I know out there,
Cool.
French version, things like of Dry Quiet War particularly. So, and Life
Okay.
on the Moon is in German, I think. So,
So you're doing this basically at the same time and basically the same place where grunge music is exploding, right?
in Seattle, yes, at exactly the same time.
Yeah. So were you part of that scene? I mean, did you know any of those guys? You hang out with any of with any of
I
the
didn't hang out with them, but I went to all the shows. Yes, I was there for all of it. I was in the little smelly, sleazy nightclubs where they all started up. Um, Going with Lucius because he had at that time lived in Seattle. We were very close during those years. And Lucius was absolutely, you had to know him. He was this megalomaniac of pop culture. He knew everything about every musical genre and everything. He knew everything about all movies. He knew everything about writing and reading. He knew everything about sports. He was an incredible follower of sports, and he lost a lot of money gambling. Uh, but he claimed he never lost any. But I have my doubts. So I mean, Lucius is just legend. He was like a force of nature. You had to meet this guy. He's gone now, but he was a huge influence on many of us, and I was particularly sort of like just in awe of this guy that who's he was a larger than life character of anybody I've ever met,
Yeah.
including his appetites. He was a big fat guy by the time, and he was like 6'6". So he was an enormous
So
man.
there's like 400 pounds, 500 pounds.
Yeah, so he was like, he was he was like NFL player size, but it wasn't, muscle at that point. But he was a really good looking guy when he was skinny. He had been a lead singer in a rock band in the 80s. I mean, in the 70s, back in Detroit, that almost made it, etc. So yeah, it was legendary, and he'd been all over Central America, and yeah, he was doing such cool. He was really good writer. He was really, whatever else you could say about Lucius, the fact that he was a drug fiend at times and often got himself off of it, and he smoked like a chimney, and he always smelled like incense, and his hair looked like yours, Dave, and in his later years. So sometimes he got mistaken for a bum when he was hanging outside his own readings. And trying one time at Elliott Bay, I remember one of the clerks came out and tried to run him away because there was going to be a big reading with Lucius Shepard that night, and they didn't want any vagrants hanging around the door scaring people off. So, it's like it was like, well, I'm the one giving the reading. He had this voice like this. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Fantastic. So if people were going to read one thing by him, do you have
By
a,
Lucius, well, a short story collection, Jaguar Hunter is a great entry point. He was a great short story writer. His novels, I don't care, and his later work is not as good as his early work.
yeah,
He got way too allegorical. There's a lot of things I didn't like about it as much, but nothing's bad. To get into Lucius, nothing is bad. It's just like some things are better than others.
yeah,
It's like, where do you get into Bob Dylan? Well, wherever the heck you want, man. It's like,
right.
So yeah, I love Lucius and I love his work especially, and anything that he ever exaggerated about or overdid or or anything mistakes he made are forgivable because he was a great artist in every way, and I absolutely respected that about him. So
Yeah.
anyway, that was Lucius Shep.
Yeah.
He was big, and so he got me into going out to this music. And then I was also an assistant debate coach at the high school in Vashon, and
Oh,
all of my kids were they were those were the Seattle kids that were into this and went to the shows. And after they graduated, I remained friends with most of them. And they were these kids were debaters, and they were also the children of hippies, and so they were like these counterculture debater types who then moved to Seattle or went to Evergreen, you know, that idiotic school out there, and but they were my buddies, and so after they were out of high school, I started hanging out with them, and we all went to the shows, particularly my buddy Josiah Palmer and I. Um, went to many shows together. So I would, you know, I saw Nirvana when they were playing little clubs and record stores.
yeah.
And especially after that, I was also writing for and after they started playing stadium shows, I was in on some of the backstage ness of it because I was by that point writing for The Stranger, which is a Seattle alternate weekly. Alternate weeklies were huge back then, and my girlfriend was the editor at the time, and
So
so
were you writing journalism or you're putting fiction in The
it
Stranger?
was journalism. Yeah. No,
Okay.
and book reviews. I reviewed books. I did everything you could do as a writer. I reviewed books for the Seattle Times back then. I was the science fiction reviewer for the Times.
Yeah.
And I wrote little sort of gonzo. It was gonzo journalism that I was doing for The
Fun.
Stranger. And you know, and I met Christine, the editor at the time, and
Yeah.
we became with each other for a time until that didn't work anymore. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Okay, a couple things. One, so first of all, Gonzo journalism. So Hunter S. Thompson, but
yeah,
also Tom Wolfe is the
Tom
journalist
Wolfe,
is in the story. There's a sort of more narrative sense, and there's a willingness to like play with language and
yeah,
use exaggerated imagery that like
yeah,
historical
yeah.
journalism hadn't done.
Right. And I also did pieces for the Seattle Weekly back page as well, the little essay section. So I was doing things in Seattle as a writer, trying to
Yeah.
make a living. So
So this is the other theme, right? It's interesting. Of course, some people publish a book and you get lucky and you make a lot of money and that's it. You're writing novels full time,
mhm.
whatever. But a lot of writers end up in a space where they're doing other things. Yes, they're writing. Yes, they're getting paid for their work. They may even be critically well regarded, maybe prize winners, and they are writing journalism, writing reviews, teaching high school debate, doing other kinds of things because you got to pay the bills still.
Yes, but they were always everything I've ever done was always oriented toward writing and edit and toward words because that is where that's what I'm good at. So and there's another strain of that I should probably that also led to doing a lot of journalism, which is the fact that from high school onward, I've been a conservative politically, even though I was in this deep counterculture scene, and remained so for years, even in New York, where I later lived, you know in doing theater and stuff. I was always right winger. You know,
Yeah.
I just didn't talk about it with those people because it was pointless to get in arguments with them. But and I also interned at the American Spectator. Um, you know, I'm friends with Greg Gutfeld and have been for many years. We were both interns together at the American
Fun.
Spectator. Things like, and so that's another strain entirely of and so and so if you're wondering why I'm the editor of a somewhat right-leaning uh whatever you might say about us at ARC,
Sure.
that's where it comes from. I was never a liberal ever,
Yeah.
but people just took me for one because that was
who you hung out with.
That was who I hung out with. And you know, I never wrote deliberately anything conservative. Uh and you know, and my journalism was Tom Wolfian, and he was a huge influence on me. I loved his novels particularly, but I loved his other stuff as well. So yeah, so that's the reason I did Gonzo Journalism. It wasn't Hunter S. Thompson, it was Tom Wolfe. That
Yep.
was the guy for me. So, and I still, you know, like look back on Bonfire of the Vanities. I'm like, that is a novel, man. That is a novel. So
Yeah.
so
Um,
anyway, so that there's that strain as well as this all this counterculture juju. But yes, I was like when Courtney Love came out and read Kurt's suicide note to at Pioneer Square, wherever we were. You know, Josiah and me were sitting there with candles, and she was like 20 feet from us on a you know, and she read that and told everybody not to sell. There was some controversy about people selling Nirvana memorabilia, like trying to make a lot of money off of Kurt. That it was a big deal at the
yeah.
time. It's pointless to, but the bass guy, Chris, and her were decrying it, and so she did that, and we were just, you know, I was there sitting underneath Courtney Love talking about Kurt blowing his brains out and everything.
Wow.
So it was, you know, I was there during all of
Yeah.
this, and the lesser things, like, you know, things that only I remember well, like how great certain bands were, like Hammerbox, that never really made it, or the fact that Mia Zapata, you got weirdly murdered, a great league singer for the Gits, I believe. This sort of you know, and it took decades for anybody solved that murder, things like that, that just, you know, that were part of that scene that will never, you know, that were beyond just, oh yeah, I liked grunge music. It was like I was
Right.
in it back then. So yeah. And
Yeah.
so,
Wow. How fun.
yeah, there's that. And it was as a listener, not as a musician.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
a knower of people that
Yeah.
of the cool bands and such. So yeah,
Let,
yeah.
let me ask,
But I
okay.
don't want to ever, I don't want to get to give the impression that because I didn't approach these as a hipster or anything I've ever done as a hipster. It's always been as I'm a writer, I'm an artist, I'm a bohemian second and only because it gets me artistic creativity and artistic uh, fuel, and anything else. This is the reason I never got into drugs, because they're useless. So yeah, absolutely useless for me. So that
As
was,
David Byrne made the same comment in one of his liner notes. I tried heroin. I couldn't do any writing on it.
yeah, well, I mean, I didn't try heroin, but you
Yeah.
know, mushrooms were just idiotic, you know, whatever. So
Yeah.
it was all and it and I just saw people being destroyed by drugs too, because I was around it, and especially pot, which is just idiotic to, you know, people were, you know, especially in the 90s, everybody thought it was just perfect and good. And this was, that guy wrote Food of the Gods, and, you know, mushrooms are pheromones with the earth trying to communicate with us, with, you know, trying to meld us into a group mind and all that. And I'm just like, no,
Yeah.
no. But
I I tell my kids I know lots of people whose lives have been destroyed by drugs. I don't know anybody who like took drugs and therefore was productive and
yeah,
impressive and powerful.
some people might claim that they are, but I always am skeptical of that. But yeah, ultimately, I don't care. It doesn't work for me.
Sure,
Um,
sure, fair enough. Yeah,
yeah, and my ultimate aim always was like, what can I do to make myself a better writer?
yeah, yeah,
Um, so and that was how, and that's the reason that I got into the subcultures of America as well. It's not because I politically agreed with anything. It was just like I want to see what's going on.
yeah,
So
yeah,
yep. So I had a life, and I was able to start writing in my mid 20s. You know,
yeah.
something kicked in and I got good enough.
Well, okay, so one of these, there's all these strands here, right? So one of the strands
Yeah.
is you went to film school, and I understand
Mhm.
you've actually had movies produced and scripts sold.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, that came later, but the fact that I had been to film school and knew how it all worked and had done some editing, film editing and stuff like that was very useful. And I knew how to write screenplays. I had a great screenwriting teacher, Paul Lucy, whose book is out there. It's really good, at USC. And whatever my experience at USC, it was not great, but I did meet Paul Lucy, who was a great mentor, while I was there. And I figured out that I did not in any way want to live in Hollywood and be part of that culture at also. Um,
Yeah.
but years later, I went to work at sci-fi.com in the early 2000s, where I was a story editor on, it's called Senior Theater. We were doing early audio dramas like podcasts. And they were throwing, this was the dot-com boom, and they were throwing a lot of money. And so we were able to hire actors like Stanley Tucci and Oliver Platt and Gina Gershon and Luke Perry and Peter Gallagher. Who else did we have? We had some Lou Diamond Phillips was in one of mine. And I either wrote a bunch of these things,
Cool.
adapted them from famous science fiction stories, or was the story editor on a lot of these. So I was connected to the Sci-Fi Network that way. And after the dot-com bust, my boss there, Brian Smith, and I became screenwriters together. We had done all these audio dramas together, mostly with Brian directing and me writing, other ways too. But so we started writing screenplays and pitching them to the Sci-Fi Channel's little monster movies Saturdays that they used to have, and we sold several to them, and two of them got made. And then these were horrible things, and they got utterly mangled in the making. But yes, had produced films. Later. One of these scripts sat around for a while at Sci-Fi and it didn't get made, but it had potential. And they gave it to, and when Chiller, the channel started up, they gave it to this really great director who they were trying to court, Larry Fessenden. And Larry read several screenplays, but he liked mine and Brian's. And by that time, Brian was not writing anymore. Never mind. Brian started an ice cream company in New York, which did very well. Anyway, but he became an ice cream king in New York, artisanal ice cream guy. So it was me doing the rewrite according to, and talking to Larry, and we worked through it. And that became the film Beneath, which is probably the best of these little things of
Yeah.
all. But it's not a great movie. But of the ones that I wrote that got produced, that would be the one if
The
you
one to go
really
see.
want to go see. Yes. Yeah.
That's
But unlike Lucius, you can't get into my work just anywhere. I would
yeah.
not suggest that would be the place to get into it. But yeah, I did that, and I continued for years trying to break into TV and film. I got a bunch of screenplays. I won some awards at festivals and stuff, but I never got it off the ground. But during that time, I started a theater troupe in New York, and we had a show on WBAI. This was called Automatic Vaudeville, our little Saturday morning show that we did. Had seven actors and a band. We did it live. It was kind of like Prairie Home Companion crossed with the Twilight Zone. It was sketch comedy that was also science fiction and fantasy based, for the most part. And I I needed actors, and I needed actors who would get up on Saturday morning for the 4 a.m. call because this was an early morning slot we got at the free radio station.
Yeah.
This was Jim Freund's show back in the day. I think he's still around, maybe even. Jim was great in helping us do this. So he got us in there and we did this show. And we did it for 2, 3 years, and then and I wrote and directed it. And my friends from that era are my friends now that are my long-term friends that I still like. And these include a lot of actors, and I married one of them eventually, who was Rika, of course,
Yeah.
my wife of 26 years now. So, um, so that was great. And so I highly recommend becoming a writer director and marrying one of your actresses. Many people say not to do that, but ours worked out. Ours worked out very well.
It's one of the running jokes in the movie, the Steve Martin movie Bowfinger. I don't know if you've seen
Yeah, 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 yeah.
it.
So, but there was a lot more to it than that, of course. But
Yeah,
that was the long and short of it. Um, but that was writing drama really improved my fiction in a way
yeah,
because when you hear actors delivering your lines, you realize that people cannot say this stuff that you used to write as your dialogue in
right.
real life, and it makes your dialogue just so much better to have actors perform it and not just like we have a read through of my story in my house. Like actually, things depend on what you wrote coming across to an audience. It was a huge help. And a huge, there were some things that absolutely failed because my dialogue sucked. It was just too long. You cannot write whole paragraphs unless it's your big epiphany scene. You can't have a monologue every time somebody's talking. So,
Right.
and when you're doing radio drama, which this was, you have to convey what's going on without having pictures. So it was an amazing apprenticeship doing these things, both at sci-fi.com and doing automatic vaudeville as well. So, and it's basically radio drama. That's what it was. And I did 4 years of it. And it was is a real help in many ways.
Yeah. I
So,
really think I look, I've never produced anything. I wrote spec scripts for a while. I really agree. So the way the dialogue has to be in a script that where it has to sort of feel natural, even though it's obviously highly artificial and no one would really
mhm,
talk this way,
it's
right?
hard.
It's hard. And where in a script, you very little, you don't have long descriptions of the scene, you don't have lengthy descriptions of action even usually. Like the
Mhm.
dialogue has to
It's
carry
a
all of it.
blueprint. Yeah. And the dialogue has to do several things in a script. Uh, dialogue conveys character. It is the embodiment of character. In fact, it has to be something that guy would say.
Yeah,
Um, and so it can't all sound like the same writer wrote it. So you got that. So, and it has to be in it. So it has to be the embodiment of character. It is a means toward characterization, first and foremost, to me. Second of all, it has to create action. It has to move the plot forward. Every piece of dialogue in a screenplay has to convey action and not just anything. It has to move the plot forward. By action, I mean story action, not
mhm,
just something that happens.
right.
Something that happens is not story action. It's nothing. So it has to work in two ways at once. Convey action, and it has to not be obvious. It has to be off the nose, and this is part of the reason that it conveys character. So the character is full of nuance and the situation is full of nuance and people just don't talk a lot of times in straightforward ways.
Yeah,
And so you gotta get it but it can't just be randomly off the nose, which many screenplay writers try to do. It just doesn't work that way. It has to be character based off the nose. It's hard stuff, especially if you're doing comedy. It's even harder. So, because it's got to be funny too. It's really a challenge. So and if you take that over to writing fiction, which I think you should, exactly the same thing in fiction. Uh, this is why I read a book and I'm evaluating it as an editor. And I'm like, all these characters sound like the same guy wrote them. Uh, and that's just like a sign that this person is not professional quality writer.
mm,
So. I mean, sometimes it's okay depending on what you're trying to do, but yeah.
sure, sure.
Yeah.
Um, so uh
So
so
anyway, these were all things that everything that I did during the 90s and the early 2000s was dedicated toward trying to make a living as a writer, but also preparing me and all these side projects. I reviewed hundreds of books for Publishers Weekly. I continue to write book reviews for other places. I was uh, I worked for the Science Fiction Book Club back when that was a thing as the guy that did coverage. So at one point I was reading all the
And
science
then you
fiction that
wrote
came.
summaries of the
I
books.
wrote summaries and recommendations of all the books.
Yeah.
So there was a time that I was probably the best read guy in science fiction, just because I read everything that came into the SF Book Club, to see whether it was whether the editors should consider it or not. And so and after that, I got into into writing audiobook scripts that I got into bridging audiobooks for. Back in the day, you used to could buy 2-hour abridgments of the thrillers, so you could read the thrillers of the day or the nonfiction bestsellers, but actually it was a 2-hour condensation of the thing. But man, to have to cut 75% of a book and still have it make sense, um, is something that really taught me a lot about story and like, all right, the story has to be here. What can I cut? What can I cut? I must make this under 2 hours, and it's a 14-hour book, so, and I did that for a while. And it was, I did some pretty big books that way. And the authors were just screaming,
Of course.
but most of them liked what I did ultimately, knowing that it had to get done.
Yeah.
Several of them told me, well, at least you did it well. So.
This is such an interesting. I've never under so my parents used to get the Reader's Digest,
Yeah, they did those condensed books. Yeah.
abridged condensed books. I never quite understood this. Um, I mean, I understand if a book like Les Miserables or maybe Dune, man,
Hmm.
there's a lot,
The Gulag Archipelago. Yes.
you, yeah, you could take out. Um, But man, it feels like you're routinely, if you're cutting down books to like 20% of their size. I mean, is the audience for that really social? Like, is this so people can say, "Oh, I read The Juror" or whatever, when what they did was, and then they can say something reasonably intelligent about it, right?
Hmm.
Um,
I have no idea. All I know is they were
yeah,
paying me $4,000 a pop to do it.
there you go.
Um, so I was happy in in that regard. It was I was working for Random House. This is freelance, and Simon Schuster's audiobooks. Back then, there was no Audible at the time, or it was just getting started. So, um, I don't think this is a trade anybody has anymore, what I did, but it was very useful. Why you would do that? Of course, yeah, yes, obviously. So you could be up on the cultural trends and everything.
Yeah,
I think people still do that. You feed it into Chat GPT and give it to summarize for you what the book was, so you don't have to read it.
yeah.
Um,
I know in nonfiction.
Frankly, I mean, this is the way I felt back then. Some of these things were so crappy that I made them better.
Yeah,
And you would be lucky if you got my abridgment. Let's just put it that way.
that's
I
funny.
had to read the whole book.
That
So
that's very
you're-
funny.
I did you a favor, listener. So, and I would venture to say 50% of what I did, you could say that about.
Yeah,
So, yeah, I made them better. It teaches you a lot about editing. It does. And author egos don't really matter that much when you've got something you must get done for a particular audience. So I don't know. Why the heck would you want to read certain books, that people are talking about and you know that they're crappy?
yeah. I think it is for social reasons. I
Yeah.
think it
A
is to
lot of
be able
people
to
write
say,
are good at subject matter, but they're not really good writers. And
yeah,
so a lot of nonfiction in particular.
yeah,
These are subject matter experts and they're not good at writing. And
yeah.
of course, they are ghostwritten.
Which you've done.
I've done many ghostwriting jobs
Yeah,
for
in the
nonfiction.
nonfiction space. Yeah.
Yes. So, yeah, yeah,
I'm pretty convinced that that a lot of book sales are basically for social reasons. People want to say they've bought,
absolutely.
or they
Yeah.
want it to be on the shelf.
Hmm.
which is fine as a writer. I hope you all feel socially obligated
Well, this is,
by my
I
books.
mean, most book covers are created so that the people that are in publishing in New York can feel good about this was the old days, maybe they don't do it anymore, going to work on the train,
Hmm.
reading that cover, and it says something about you, what cover other people see in the Acela corridor and it's still that way. Book covers are aspirational. I mean, people that argue otherwise, and then I've had professional editors arguing with me, and they're just wrong. It's like covers are all about the aspirations of the readers of those books that you want, and 70%, 30% are about like how conveying what's in the book and making a great cover.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, and that's the reason you see so many crappy covers because they're aiming for a certain or so many derivative covers. It's because they're aiming for a certain kind of person.
Hmm.
Especially the ones that are all flowery and pastel-y, and you know exactly the readership that they think they're aiming for with those books. So
Yeah, or I was in the from 99 until 2004, I was riding the subways and trains in around London,
yeah,
with a bunch of bankers and lawyers and accountants, and Harry Potter hit big. And for
hmm,
a year or so, you would see bankers and accountants and lawyers with those sort of cartoony Bloomsbury
yeah,
covers. Um,
Scholastic. Oh
you know,
well, it's England, yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah.
Scholastic, yeah,
And and then they put them out in black adult looking covers because they realized they were selling so many copies to, you know,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
to those people.
Well, that's the thing with covers. You just gotta consider who you're trying to sell to when you're thinking about covers. It's not a purely artistic decision,
Right.
but this is
Doesn't
all its
purely,
own. This is a huge subject we could talk
yeah,
about
yeah,
forever.
yeah.
But,
Well,
yeah,
well, I want
and
to,
I care about it passionately, but in the end, if what's inside is crap, then it doesn't matter.
yeah,
So,
in the long term, right?
yes, and
Uh,
sometimes the very long term.
yeah.
But
Um, so at what point did you write Metaplanetary? This is the novel people always, when I hear you mention as a writer, this is the novel people mention.
yeah, well, it started as sort of a fix-up of my novella Grist, which was in Asimov's. And then I just went from there and I just threw every idea. I'm a very idea philosophical driven science fiction writer, although I think I'm also a stylist.
Yeah.
So I threw everything in the kitchen sink into those books, especially Metaplanetary that I could think of. AI, Civil War in it's about a civil war in the solar system, 1,000 years from now in the future. Very advanced stuff. So I was trying to make it seem like a future that was really what a future could be and not Star Trek future, which is, just like today projected for. I was trying very hard to make it weird and cool, like some of the super science writers of the 50s say, or of AJ, what's his name, Van Vogt book, or who's the other guy that did it's crazy. I know all these names, but they don't come back to me when I need them. But the Nostrella books and all those from the
Yeah.
50s. These were and things that just seemed like so weird that they could be the future. I tried to make that world be. So I was coming up with what is AI really going to be like 1,000 years from now. This was, back in the 2000s, but it's getting close to what I was projecting. What are
Yeah.
people going to be like, and how are they going to be influenced by this? They are going to be integrated in many ways, but not in many other ways. Where are they going to live? I love the idea of these of giant structure science fiction. I love the whole idea of the ring world,
Uh-huh.
et cetera of Niven and Pornell and those guys. So I created this thing called the Met, which is a connection of all the planets by these vast web-like unbreak. And I said, so what would be the physics of it? How could you possibly connect Mars and and Earth with a physical thing that that survived. Um,
Yeah.
and so I came up with all these quantum physics explanations for this. So I had AIs, quantum physics, and I was like, oh, and there's longevity. What would these kind of beings be? Well, they would maybe become spaceships and live on the edge in the Oort clouds. Um, so I had that go, so I just had this vast tapestry I was trying to create of a weird, wonderful future that where there was a war that would be fought on those terms between the inner system and the outer system. And I was on the side of the outer system, of course, they were the good guys. So the inner system was like trying to make all the AIs and the people that were sort of AI-ish, the LAPs, large arrays of personalities, I called them, into a group mind. And the other guys were trying to keep it all separate, the good guys. Nobody was against AIs or anything like that. And it's a doomed prospect to be against AIs, my opinion. So anyway, that was the thing, and it was the big contention is what is humanity going to take to the stars? Are we going to be the Borg, or are we going to be a loose confederation of creativity and wonder? That's the question because it was, they were on the verge of figuring out how to do faster than light travel, but not quite in this world of mine. So
Yeah.
they had instantaneous communication, but uh, they didn't have quantum based or whatever travel yet. So
Yeah.
anyway, so that's Metaplanetary, my
Very cool.
magnum opus of science fiction, which I probably won't ever get back to doing anything like that again.
Yeah.
Um,
I
so,
hope
but
you will.
maybe, who
Be
knows?
fun to see. So but did you publish that while you were in New York? Is that about the time?
That was, yeah. I lived in, I wrote Metaplanetary in New York. Yes, I went to Central Park. I was running a lot. I used to run a lot. Uh, and I was running in Riverside. It was not Central Park, it was Riverside Park. I lived up on, at that time on the Upper West Side at 111th Street. And I would just go out there, lie down. I was looking at clouds. I thought, what, those are spaceships. I had this giant sketch pad that I would take out with me. And I used the sketch pad as my novel conception pad, and I drew pictures and did all the things you do to get a novel going in your mind. And yeah, so I wrote it mostly living in that little apartment on 111th and Broadway, down the street from the cathedral.
Close to Columbia, right? 111th and Broadway,
Yeah, it's very near Columbia. It's near Tom's,
the diner.
the diner that is a
Do do
Seinfeld
do
diner.
do 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 do. Isn't that
Yeah. Well,
Tom's?
no, I don't know if that, yeah, I think that was hers. Although several Tom's locations in New York, there's more than one place called Tom's in New York, claim her. I believe the one by Columbia is probably Susanna Vega's
Yeah.
place, but it was also the Seinfeld diner.
Oh,
So,
yeah, that's right. That's right.
so yeah, so I was there plenty of times at Tom's. So, and it was interesting to live in New York. I lived in New York for 8 years. So, that's where I met my wife. So that was great. And but at when it came out, I was living at that time. I did about 5 months, 6 months. I was living in Barcelona, uh, outside of Barcelona in the mountains, in a little
Cool.
area called San Lorenzo Saval.
Catalan country.
Yes, it was Catalonia. Yeah, so Catalunya, etc. So yeah, so a lot of I believe when Metaplanetary came out, yeah. And then we came back to New York, and at that time I moved to Brooklyn. And so, but I did write Metaplanetary before I lived in Brooklyn and Greenpoint. So I spent 5 years in Greenpoint as well. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's
So
where my daughter was born.
in Greenpoint.
She was born in St. Vincent's in the West Village, but yeah, we were
Yeah.
living in Greenpoint. So St.
Wow.
Vincent's doesn't exist anymore. So
Really? When was that? Let's see.
years ago, they went out of the maternity business back.
Uh,
Yeah,
I
I don't
remember
even think it
sitting
was a
in
hospital.
the St. Vincent's ER with my wife in
Oh yeah.
1998. Yeah, not maternity ward. It was I can't remember what it was. But my wife had flown to Argentina back. She was working as a lawyer at a big firm and developed a blood clot. And it was Sunday.
Oh my God.
We were
Yeah.
in the St.
We
Vincent's.
had we overlapped in New York. You were at NYU
I was at
law
NYU
school.
until 99. Yep. And then went to London.
Yeah, yeah. So I was in New York from 97 to 2004, I guess. So
Yeah. That's kind of fun to think about. Uh,
I
at
don't
some
remember
point,
seeing you, but
yeah, at some point we were on the A train together or something.
yeah.
Uh, so okay,
I was
so
on the one in the nine mostly. So that's probably why we didn't run into each other.
I took the one in the nine down in the summer. I had would have been the summer of 1998. I had my summer associate job, and for 8 weeks I was working down basically Battery Park. Next to Battery Park, there's a little 30-story building, and the firm
Hmm.
had a floor there.
That's the very end of the one in the nine. Yeah.
Yeah,
Somewhere. Yeah. And the seven when I was in Brooklyn. I
yeah,
would, I was very near the Queens border. I'd walk over to the seven, get on it, and go in. So
I took the F train when I was in Brooklyn out to
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's the
Prospect
way
Park,
to.
Greenwood Cemetery kind of area.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, so at some point, you got into teaching, right?
Yes.
Did you go from New York to Dallas? What's the
Yes. Yeah. After Koki was born, I realized, my daughter, I realized how horrific it would be to try to get her into. I didn't have enough money to send her to private schools. And I was a writer. So, I mean, I was doing in New York, I was doing things like managing a coffee house on the side and this place called Biblios in Tribeca. I was the manager for a couple of years there, the assistant manager, not the manager. But that was an experience in itself. So I was doing crap like that and doing all these publishing crap jobs. Like, they're not crap, but they were, like doing
the
coverage.
miscellaneous kind of
Yes.
jobbing work? Yeah,
Yes, exactly. Getting what I could.
yeah,
And it just became obvious that I don't want I was raising a family there would just be there's some people that just are dedicated New Yorkers and they will not leave once they come.
yes,
The hometown rejects, I call them. They don't want to go back where they came from because
yes,
they've found their tribe now. And
yes.
and they want to stay there and they would
London
sacrifice
has some of the same people.
anything to stay there.
Yeah,
And I am not that man. I love living in the country just as much as the city, and the suburbs hold no fear for me. I grew up in the suburbs. It was not something I wanted to escape. It's just something I did escape. So I've never run away from my roots, or I'm a conservative. So I grew up in the southern suburbs, and I'm still that guy.
yeah.
So anyway, uh, so I had to do something else, and so we took an opportunity to get a house that we had because my dad and my parents lived my dad was a cartographer
Mm.
for an oil company. He was a map maker most of his life, and he worked for an oil company at the time, and so there was a house there that we could move into, which we did with our newborn, our 1 year old. And so mainly we just moved there so Koki could have a good school system and everything. And that led to me getting a job at the University of Texas at Dallas as a senior lecturer, which I did for the next 6 years. Taught mostly half grads, half undergrad. I taught this giant class every semester called the Literature of Fantasy and Science Fiction. I had about 125 kids in most of those classes. It was a big arena classroom. It really teaches you about how to be in front of a crowd as well. So, that was great. And but in on the grad level, I taught writing workshops like how to write science fiction stories, how to write any story, short stories, how to write poems. I have another poetry train of my stuff. How to write screenplays because I was a screenplay writer, so I did all these also, and we did these workshop style. So doing 6 years of workshop with grad students who are wannabe writers or think they might want to do it was very, very useful. And many of my students, not many, but several of them went on to do very well for themselves. As so, some I was teaching took, and our buddy and coworker David F. Sherrod was one of those students.
Yeah.
And you know, my friend now, my former student VJ Boyd, out in Hollywood, he was a staff writer on Justified, and he's the showrunner on this show that's out right now called oh, what's it called? Just came out on Netflix. I better remember this. The Madness, The Madness.
Madness. Yeah.
Yes, he's the showrunner on The Madness. Um, and his brother just, you know, several people did well both in fiction and in screenwriting and script writing for television that came out of my class. So I'm very
Yeah.
proud of that. And that sort of led to the fact that I was willing to become an editor
Yeah.
um, in fiction. And because you when you are a teacher and you're not really able to put as much into your writing as you would like, just because it's so, to be a good teacher, you have to sacrifice a lot of your writing side. It led me to put my ego aside very quickly on things, and whether I was ever going to be a famous writer ceased to matter to me.
Hmm.
Um, it'd
Hmm.
still be cool, but it just ceased to. I don't care anymore, you know. And I never cared a great deal, but but I was very driven to do good work, and I still am, but I really don't care now. So
Yeah.
that gave me the mental space to say, well, you know, I've done all this editorial. Maybe I should just take a job as an editor, and I did.
Yeah.
So I became a senior editor at Bain for 10 years. So, uh,
Yeah.
and then moved on to Regnery and as a nonfiction editor, and now we're doing Arc.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now you kind of a couple threads here. There's so many actually kind of threads going on. It's
Yeah, I
delightful.
know I'm just going on and on. And
No, you're not. This is
there's a
this
lot of
is
anecdotes all associated with these things that are
this
insane, some of
this
them.
is
So,
fantastic, and I think people will be watching this and having a lot of having a great time. Um, I know you Bain you wrote and co-wrote some stuff at Bain. Was that mostly while you were there as an editor?
yeah,
Okay, during those 10 years.
yeah. I was a co-author on David Drake's general series, Ross, what's his name? Whitehall.
Hmm.
I forget his first name. Yeah, I did two of those books
Yeah.
with David Drake, who was a great guy. He just died not that long ago. He was a
Yeah.
great guy. Many people thought of he was a irascible curmudgeon, but he and I got along great.
He can be that and also a great guy.
He
There's no
could,
doubt.
yeah. Well, I mean, he had a low tolerance for bullshit, in it and in lack of quality, and he thought I was good.
Yeah.
So I think that that was really what I'm really proud of the fact that David Drake thought I was a good writer,
Yeah.
and worthy of writing with him. I appreciated that a great deal. So
Yeah. That's
yeah, the books are The Savior and what's the other one? The first one. Uh, Hell, I can't remember the names of my own books now. So
um
that inured me to ghostwriting, which I that's not ghostwriting, but
right.
I was working directly off of David's 10,000 word outlines, but and he read the final product and went through it as well. The Heretic and The Savior, those are the two.
No.
But it also made me understand that since I don't really have an ego about getting my name on a thing, I'm perfectly capable if somebody wants to pay me. This is what I was, you know, I will write a book for you if you want to pay me. and you can put your name on it. I don't care. And edit and not, I've done this for companies. They hire me to do it, not
Yeah.
authors don't hire me to do it. I don't freelance ghostwriting,
Right.
but yeah,
Be a pretty rich author who was gonna hand you a big enough check.
exactly. Well, I mean, there's a lot of ghostwriters out there that I wasn't trying to make a business of it. It just came my way.
Yeah.
All of it just came my way. Um, I never tried to make a business out of it, but I did quite a few books there. So many of them, not many, but some of them you will have heard of. They were
Yeah.
all nonfiction.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
But you've signed NDA, so you're not going to tell us.
I'm not going to tell anything.
Yeah. Yeah. Of
Yeah.
course.
So,
So this point about
and also, I mean, a lot of these were very, very collaborative with the person.
who
They're
is the
not.
subject matter expert, as you say. They're the
Yes,
ones
they
who,
are the subject matter expert. I
yeah.
want to go with what they want to convey. You're not, you've got to lose your ego when you're doing this. You've got to figure out what the writer wants to say,
Yeah.
and because they're going to approve it or not. So, and the greatest compliment is when the writer likes what you did, even though you're the writer, um, you know, but they're like, yeah, this is exactly what I wanted to say, but couldn't quite get it, you know.
Yeah.
And that is the high of the ghostwriter right there.
Yeah.
Getting the author on board.
So this point that you talk about sort of being known and not caring anymore whether you're known as a famous writer. This is interesting because I think on the top left shelf behind you, I think that's the Easton Press edition of Moby Dick. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, so I have that
It's
one
one
too.
of many editions of Moby Dick I have, but yes.
Okay, very good. So I mean, famously during Melville's lifetime, this was an obscure novel.
Yeah. Well, it was
Um,
the novel that killed his career.
that killed his career.
That's right.
And then I forget exactly when.
Perhaps Metaplanetary was my Moby Dick.
Well, but if it is, then that might be that, hey, this is sort of the point. Um, a
In that way.
yeah, we don't know long term, right? It's so
Yeah, who knows?
interesting
Yeah.
what's
So
popular
many,
or
exactly. So many things that were the shit, nobody
disappear.
even knows about anymore.
Right. Right. Gothic novels were huge. Most people
Yeah.
can't name a Gothic novel that isn't also Frankenstein.
Yeah, or large swaths of people who were considered the next up and coming literary sensation in the
Yes.
90s, or and nobody knows who they are anymore.
But in sci-fi fantasy, I cannot tell you how many times someone has said this guy's the next Brandon Sanderson, and
Yeah,
then after two books, the series is
yeah,
over. Right? He's hot for
yeah.
one book.
Or even if they are hot for a lot of books, they are forgotten.
Right.
Uh, which may happen to Brandon Sanderson, I hate to say.
I
So
hate to say it too, but
don't know what's
we,
going to
well,
happen.
we don't know. Um, we don't know. So yeah, I guess that cautions us all to be humble
I
and
mean, I think Tolkien's probably got it locked, but you never know. Maybe not.
yeah, maybe not 200 years from now.
Maybe. Yeah.
Um, yeah. One of the things we haven't talked about, poetry. I did not know you had a whole poetry thread. This is news to me. But
Yeah.
but influences. I one of the things I think I hear you saying is that you ended up in science fiction, but not necessarily deliberately. Like it wasn't necessarily that you said, I want to write science fiction. You said, I want to be a writer, and those were sort of the markets that you found.
Yes. And the fact that I had nothing against science fiction either. I liked it and I still love it.
Yeah.
But it's just one of the many things I read. And it always was.
Yeah.
You know, I was the guy that was reading all the classics and Piers Anthony in the 80s.
Yeah.
Although really I never found anything that was better than A Spell for a Chameleon, and I gave up after a while. But anyway,
And Piers Anthony,
yeah,
that is basically the apex of his career, is the
yeah,
first book of the Xanth.
it was a damn good book.
It
So I
was.
loved it. It used to fire my imagination quite a bit. But I was also reading Annie Dillard and everything else, and every classic book that you could imagine I was devouring, and lots of horror and mysteries, many, many mysteries, um, etc. So working my way through it, I just can't believe how much I read when I was a teenager. Sometimes when I think about it, I don't know how that happened, but it did somehow. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so but the thing that sort of as a young man formed me, the books, the fiction books that I sort of thought, I could base a personal ethos on these books. One of them was Moby Dick.
Mm.
There's three of them if you want to know them.
Yeah, let's hear.
There's Moby Dick. There's The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway,
Hmm.
his first real successful novel. Um, and and there's the Moviegoer by Walker Percy. These are sort of my triumvirate of I'm going to form my personality around these books. My personal aesthetics and ethos is going to come from this. So that's what I did. I read Moby Dick for the first time hiking through Philmont as a Boy Scout,
Mm.
and which was a really weird experience to combine. So yeah.
So at what point did you
On the
settle
other
on?
hand, I read War and Peace while I was stranded for nearly 4 days in a snowstorm in the middle of the Olympic Peninsula, in a trail shelter all by myself, and I thought I might not get out, and so I wanted to die having read War and Peace. So
I'm here and I've got it.
yep, I had it with me. What the heck? So
That's such a writer.
yeah,
At what point did you consciously say to yourself, "These are my three"? Like, is this something you discovered by the time
it
you were in
was
college?
it was no, it happened all through my 20s,
Mm.
but by my 30s, these were my three.
Yeah,
I didn't say it ever, except finally, it's something that I've coalesced around
yeah,
saying when I had to talk about this stuff, but it
right,
just was. So,
right.
and I've got, if I collect any books, it's like editions of those three. I'm not really a book collector, so I like tearing books apart too much. So,
Yeah, I especially nonfiction. I have a hard time reading nonfiction without writing in it. So
mhm.
I never borrow anybody's book for fear that I'll do it inadvertently.
Oh yeah, I'm terrible about that. So,
Yeah,
I also don't loan my books out, so you don't have to worry about mine.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's a
because you'll
good.
never see them again.
You never see them again. That's why some of my favorite books I've bought 2 and 3 times because I loan it out and it does not
That's
come back.
right. That's right.
Yeah.
I've stalked somebody to get one of my books back before.
Ah,
So
that's
uh,
fabulous.
it was actually Lucius's Jaguar Hunter. I loaned it to somebody and he wasn't giving it back. And I was like, and Lucius signed it for me. And it was really important to me.
Yeah,
And so I just hung out at his house until he gave it back to me. Uh,
that's funny.
yeah.
That's
So,
excellent. Well, if you were going to give advice to anybody, who wanted a writing career or maybe who wanted specifically to think about submitting to ARC,
mhm.
um, what would you I mean, I think frankly, just telling your story is a source for people to kind of think about stuff and draw their own lessons from. But like, what advice would you give someone?
Well, I'm the guy you got to get through on the final gate. You know, it's like if you can slay me, I'm the Ender Dragon, man.
You're the boss. You're the level boss.
Well, yeah, you could not exactly, but yeah, it's like so I am very demanding of quality for one thing, and if you have quality, you can shirk on so many other things that are our so-called touchstones. If it's good, we're gonna, and Dave, you're the same way. It's like, we're looking for certain things, but man, this is good. You know,
Yeah,
unfortunately, most people think they're good and they're not. It's very analogous to sports. M Many people think they have what it takes for the show, but they just don't. Um, I don't know what to do about that. Disillusion. Hate to do it. Anyway, the thing to consider is, yeah, is not that there are specific tick points that'll get you through us to us. It's that you got to do your research on us. It's like, don't
Yeah,
send us stuff we're not going to publish or we won't publish it. It's like, look at, read Witchy Eyed. This is the guy who wrote that book,
yeah,
And there is that reading that book will tell you something about DJ Butler's aesthetics. Look
yeah,
at what we say online. Look at what we are not inscrutable, monoliths that you're trying to figure out. We're not a puzzle to be solved. We're just like people that are very much accessible to figuring
yeah,
out. So read what we're and figure out what we say we're going to put out in the future. That is probably what we will be buying. So, we're going to do Larry Correa contemporary fantasy. We're going to do Travis Corcoran science fiction. We're going to do Megan Basham doing a really cool historical thriller. We're going to do Peach Keenan's book, which is going to be a near future science fiction, probably with some satirical elements. We are going to do this crazy book about the CIA. We are going to do uh, Yuri Kurylenchuk's amazing little book about that's based in Hebrew folklore. It's a contemporary fantasy, but based in sort of Jewish folklore stuff. It's really good. And who else did I miss? Somebody that we've signed already. Yeah. So that's
that might be everyone we signed, but we're looking at others. Yeah, and we'll
yeah.
make
And
them
there's
public.
people doing rewrites for us right now that very likely we're going to buy those books as well.
Yeah,
So
and we're not trying to hide. I love this point, Tony. We're not trying to hide. We keep trying to tell people this is what we like. And
yes.
it's so
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
can send us more of what we like.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I mean, if you think the fact that I was at Regnery and at Bain for 15 years or whatever it was, I mean, even longer maybe, but that doesn't mean that what those publishers published is what you should send us. It means that yes, obviously I was at those places and they wanted me and they hired me. So that's something to consider. But if you send me a Bain book, I'm probably not going to take it
Yeah,
uh, because I don't, that's not what we're doing. I got other influences that I was not able to exercise while at Bain, and so do you, and so does David Afsharirad. We all worked there, but we are not Bain.
yeah.
Um,
And in some ways, it's maybe more useful to think of you as the guy that lived in a bus on Vashon Island for 5 years, or the young dad running around Riverside Park.
Right. You better keep that in your mind if you want to get through this Ender Dragon. Yeah. So
Yeah,
yeah, it's not there's not a checklist, and if you're simpatico, if you vibe with us, that's what should be your choice. That should be these are the guys I want more than anything to be my publisher. That would be the attitude toward, not like, how can I get them to like this thing that I wrote? And how can I make it sound like something they would like, but it's really my
right.
thing. It's like, no, we have to be on the same road together.
Yeah,
And if we're not on the same road together, you're wasting your time. And I don't
yeah,
want to waste your time, as a writer.
yeah,
So, but there's no checklist. There's no other way to do it other than that. So, but I think we have extraordinarily broad entryway. Nothing is precluded. There's no like, oh, it did this and I don't like it, except quality. It's got to be good.
yeah,
That's really the only um, threshold value. And if it's just really good, if it's just really fast-paced adventure novel, sci-fi that it's not really good, we're not going to publish it, or
yeah.
fantasy or mystery. It's like, oh, it's a competent, hard-boiled story. We're not going to publish it.
It's so interesting. I think a kind of a craft. Um, uh,
Because we have limited resources is why, not because we don't like your work.
right. Not because we don't think you've learned craft, right?
Yeah.
We've seen books that people have clearly, with respect to craft, have gone and done the work, and they're
Hmm.
competent. The book is structured, but they just don't love it, right? They just don't.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
doesn't have is not good. There's not a thing in there that a spark.
Yeah. But so it's both. I mean, craft is absolutely essential and we demand it.
Sure.
It needs to be that sort of amalgam of craft and art. That's genre right there. That is like genre. When craft and art come together, that's genre. That's genre fiction, and that's what makes it great and what draws people to it. I think is it's sort of like I wrote an essay in the New York Review of Science Fiction years and years ago about how craft and art must intertwine in order to make great writing, particularly science fiction. And I analogized it to a square knot, like from it's which is basically two loops holding on to each other. And one of those loops is craft and the other one is art. And that's what makes the square knot. And if you tie a granny knot, it's going to come loose.
Uh,
So
that is the metaphor of a Boy Scout. I love it.
yeah, yeah. Eagle Scout, what can I say?
That's so am I. So am I.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
when we were overlapping in Manhattan, I was actually scoutmaster of a small troop at that time. So
Very cool. Very cool.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
I
uh,
got wood badge.
oh, better than me. I'm Eagle, but I didn't do any of the Order of the Arrow or the sort of side
Yeah,
quest stuff.
yeah, yeah. Well, I don't have an award in Mormon theology like you.
There you go. I am
Mhm.
very fancy.
So, and
um,
I don't speak Latin and Greek
uh,
or read it. So,
yeah,
yeah.
read
But
fewer
those
books.
are pretty much useless languages, aren't they, Dave?
They're pretty much useless. Um,
The lingua franca.
yeah, but if I ever go back in time, I will. It'll be very useful.
Exactly. And that's probably, it's not precluded. It might happen.
It might happen.
It's a
Um,
it's a good survival thing to keep in your trunk when your go bag.
yeah.
Yeah.
So look, this has been great, actually, Tony. Is there anything that you think we ought to talk about that we haven't?
No, just I wish I got more like little anecdotes because every portion of every, if you ever meet me and talk to me anywhere, what you'll get is a guy sitting down and listening to you mostly because, that's where I get all my ideas actually is asking people stuff about themselves. But then this is very odd for me. But I will also crank out some stories that maybe I barely touched on the great stories of hanging with Lucius, grunge
Yeah.
crap, living in Prague,
The New York publishing scene.
all about New York. Oh, it's so much about New York that places I went, some weird stuff that went down. That I just got mixed up in all sorts of things so if you ever get a chance, to pigeonhole me, you can get me to talk about all this stuff.
Yeah.
But I will never just do it. You gotta want me to say it because generally what I'll do is try to, is try to steal your story from you. So that
So
is
that's
one writerly instinct that never has died in me, I'll tell you that. So,
well, that's a great piece of advice to writers is when they see you at a convention uh, ask for stories, hit you up and get you talking.
yeah, or tell me interesting crap that's not about writing because I don't want to hear anything of your theories about publishing and writing because you don't know anything. But you don't know anything I haven't heard already. Let's put it that way. But the weird stuff that's happened in your life, I don't know that. Tell me that. So,
Yeah, very cool.
yeah.
Very cool. Well, Tony, thanks for joining us. For your listeners, thank you for joining us for this installment, this episode of the Go Forward Lounge. Look forward to seeing you next time. Remember, the humans win in the end.
Thank you, DJ Butler.